Welcome to Democracy Matters, a program of New Hampshire Citizens Alliance, a 35-year-old organization working for social and economic justice. This is a nonpartisan, nonprofit, and we believe that democracy matters. So the show talks about issues that matter and that are important to our democracy. I'm Olivia Zink. My colleague Karen Kelly will be hosting Democracy Matters on a regular basis. We start the show with an update. One quick update is that the end of the month, March 31st, is the last day to enroll in Health Insurance Marketplace to get covered for 2014. So if you're not signed up, you can enroll by going or get information by going to nhcitizensalliance.org or visiting coveringnewhampshire.org. Today, our guest is David Cobb. It's a great honor to have David in studio, and I just want to let David introduce himself to you. David, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Well, sure. Thanks, Olivia. It's really a great pleasure to be here. You know, I'm a lawyer by training and a constitutional law scholar. As such, I've sued corporate polluters, I've lobbied elected officials, I've run for office myself. I ran for Attorney General in Texas, pledging to use that office to revoke the charters of corporations that routinely violate health, safety, and public health law. And I've engaged in nonviolent civil disobedience. In other words, Olivia, I believe that we need to do everything that we can and use all the tools available to us to make the United States of America a functioning democratic republic. Today, I have the honor of being the spokesperson for Move to Amend, a multiracial, multi-ethnic coalition of groups and individuals from across the country who are coming together to demand a constitutional amendment to abolish the illegitimate court-created doctrines, not one but two doctrines. One, the idea that a corporation must be treated as a person, as if it had constitutional rights of human beings. And belly buttons too, I guess. And number two, the idea, also created by the court, that's also illegitimate, that money equals speech. Now, I know we'll go into these two in detail, but just to frame the conversation, Olivia, and for the viewers, let's be clear. These two doctrines together have stolen our sacred right to self-government, and we have a broad-based, multiracial, multi-ethnic coalition coming together, and here's the kicker, from the left and the right, principled liberals, principled conservatives, moderates alike, who are coming together to say, even though we disagree on some policy issues, we agree with the principle that this is supposed to be a democratic republic, that the Constitution protects people and ensures that we, the people, rule. And that is the most exciting thing I've ever worked on in my life.
Yeah, it is exciting. And just this week at town meeting, 47 communities in New Hampshire took that step with Move to Amend to say we don't believe that corporations are people and money is speech, and that we need a 28th Amendment to the Constitution, which joins 500 communities nationally?
Well, there are actually more than that, because Move to Amend did not even exist before 2010, Olivia. Now, many of us have been working on this issue for decades, myself included, but the Move to Amend campaign to actually call for a constitutional amendment as a solution was only formed in 2010. Since that time, again, we've grown 332,000 people. But get this, we've helped 500 communities pass city council resolutions or county governmental resolutions in support. 16 states have passed resolutions in support of Move to Amend. And we have put it on the ballot before we counted 100 times. So because of the warrants of New Hampshire, you've actually increased that number dramatically. But the point is, we've also put it on the ballot and let ordinary people vote on it the way the warrants here in New Hampshire did. And we win almost always. It's very rare to lose. And we usually win by supermajority. So what we're finding is that we're tapping into an anxiety, an anxiousness, and I'm going to say it, a moral outrage on the part of the left and the right that feels like special interest groups and the wealthy have seized control over our own governments. And we're finding ways to work together. And I know one of the things that's so exciting to me is just how many communities that are in traditionally conservative areas the Move to Amend warrant won.
Yeah, and it won by like 3-1 in some of these really conservative towns. So it was great. But it also strikes to the heart where ordinary citizens are feeling, you know, I want to be part of this democracy, but yet 132 individuals are donating 60% of the money in our election. So just want to.
Yeah, and let's actually be clear about this, Olivia, because it's not just the 130, as outrageous as that is, right? It's also the fact that artificial entities like corporations, or for that matter, trade unions, are spending the majority of money. So one of the things that makes Move to Amend so unique is that we say, first, only human beings have constitutional rights. And this is important because corporations have been overturning environmental protection laws, worker safety laws, public health laws, as well as campaign finance laws. So Move to Amend is very clear that we oppose the doctrine that allows corporations to have constitutional rights. By the way, an act of judicial activism, because the courts created that idea. It's not a statute. It's not the elected representatives. Right. One of the reasons that so many conservatives are joining with us is because of their opposition to judicial activism itself. The second idea, that money is speech, this has been allowing wealthy individuals to hijack our elections. And again, I don't care if it's George Soros on the left or the Koch brothers on the right. I don't want wealthy individuals to be able to drown out our voices. Let's actually...
It's not even drowning out our voices. It's not even like somebody standing up with a megaphone. It's like a tractor trailer truck with speakers, right? I mean, the amount of that I can, my voice can be amplified, the amount that these voices are being amplified. And in New Hampshire, in our governor's race, just so Governor Hassan spent $2 million. Her opponent spent a little less than $2 million, so the candidate spent $4 million. These special interest groups from out of state spent $19 million. What on earth are they doing spending that much money? It's those TV ads that you just want to turn off. It's the mail that you get in your mailbox. But it's, what are outside groups? What are they gaining?
Right, and especially in New Hampshire, I think it's really important to recognize that New Hampshireites have a tradition of individual thinking, of independent politics. And the fact that $19 million came flooding into your governor's race, that's an assault. There's no other way to say it. That's an assault. And what's even more tragic, Olivia, those $19 million were spent on 30-second ads, so much sound and fury signifying nothing. It's not even reasoned discourse. It's not even debate. The reality is that if at town meeting, which y'all have such a great tradition of, you actually have ordinary people engaging in discourse. And yes, debate, disagreement. But when you're actually in a conversation, you listen to one another. You grapple together. That's the great idea of democracy, right? These 30-second ads that are just assaulting one or the other, no conversation is taking place, no dialogue is taking place. We're not even really talking about issues anymore. So I'm glad that you brought up the example here in New Hampshire, and let's be clear, that money, we don't even know where it's all coming from. Mm-hmm. Because of the recent Citizens United versus FEC decision, we know that foreign corporate money is actually entering into our electoral process, and it's legal. For the first time in the history of the United States, it's actually legal to do that, Olivia. We at Move to Amend say, ya basta, enough already. This is crazy. We really need to actually build a broad-based movement in this country that says, regardless of our disagreement on issues, we're going to come together to build a movement that actually says we take the Founding Fathers seriously. We the people rule in this country. We the people are hallowed words, right? It expresses the idea that done correctly, our government is a democratic republic. It's a democracy, but it's also a republic, a democratic republic. Democracy means the people rule. Collectively, we get to make our decisions. But it's also a republic, Olivia, which means that even if the majority, the broader politics, does not agree with my right to free speech, it doesn't matter because I have an individual right to free speech. So do you. Whether you agree with me on other issues or not, every viewer has the inherent inalienable right to speak, to assemble, to worship or not worship as they see fit. See, these rights are sacred and sacrosanct, but they're human rights, Olivia. Corporations don't have them. Unions don't have them. Nonprofit corporations don't have them. Artificial entities created under the state process, the chartering process, do not have inherent and inalienable constitutional rights. And that's why Move to Amend is uniting the left and the right in a broad-based movement to say we govern in this country.
Yeah, and I think at town meeting last week, there was hour-long debates at these community town meetings where people went back and forth and really had those conversations about, David, are you clear that corporations aren't entitled to any rights? And it's like, no, corporations should have rights, but they're just not the rights that the Constitution gave. Constitutional rights are just for people, and corporations should have rights too, but those are the rights that we, the people, should give them.
And I'm so glad that you brought that up, Olivia, because that gets to a very important idea. At Move to Amend, we know that corporations should have legal rights, but those are statutory rights. Those are created through the statutory process that allows them to exist, right? Just like unions have rights, but those are statutory rights.
And unions are corporations for those listeners out there, right? They register and they're a corporation.
Right. Well, unions are artificial entities, right? So there's a legal distinction. They're not corporations per se, but they are created under the law. So, but we do agree with you that unions, as unions, don't have inherent inalienable constitutional rights. Neither do corporations, whether they're for-profit or non-profit. And this is the idea. Like the fact is that the political process of giving limited liability. I mean, think about that for a moment, folks. A limited liability is a profound privilege. It's not a right under the Constitution. So we, the people, get to say, well, if you're going to have limited liability, these are the restrictions on your conduct. And let's just take this opportunity to go back in history. In New Hampshire, for over 150 years, the New Hampshire state legislature controlled the chartering process, said how long a corporate charter could last, what kind of business you could do with your corporate charter, and here's the most important one, I think, consistently and repeatedly said, for a corporation to be allowed to do business in the state of New Hampshire, you had to serve the public interest. Your conduct could not be an assault or an affront on the public interest of the state of New Hampshire or the residents of New Hampshire. A profound different idea than what we're operating under today.
A profound different idea of that corporation's goal is to serve the public interest. And I think we sort of saw that happen in history where we had shareholder capitalism, where the corporation benefited the shareholder, meaning the community at large. Mm-hmm. And we have really switched that to the stakeholders, the CEOs, the stockholders.
And I'm so glad you brought that up, Olivia, because I want to really underscore that Move to Amend supports business. Mm-hmm. Move to Amend believes in commerce. We believe that corporations should exist. We just don't think corporations have inherent inalienable constitutional rights. Corporation lawyers should not be able to go into court to argue to overturn any law based on corporate constitutional rights. That's all. Mm-hmm. However, we think that corporations have an important role to play and will continue to have a role to play. Think of it this way. A corporation is a tool that's created through the chartering process, and it's a very powerful tool. Mm-hmm. And like any tool, they can be put to good or bad use. Move to Amend isn't anti-corporation any more than we're anti-hammer. To say you're anti-corporation or pro-corporation is as ridiculous as saying, I'm anti-hammer, and somebody else say, no, I'm pro-hammer. What do I mean by that? I want you to imagine, Olivia, and viewers to imagine that somebody doesn't have a house to live in, but luckily I have a hammer in hand, I'm a skilled craftsperson, so I'm going to build a house for that person to live in. Is that hammer good? Some would say, yes, of course. Productive, constructive use being put. But now, Olivia, let me say, here I am, hammer in hand, but now my intention is to bash your skull in. So is the hammer good or bad?
Bad. Well,
bad?
unless you think I should be hammered in the head.
But of course, it was a trick question. Why? Because the hammer is not good or bad in either circumstance. The intent was horrific. In the second example, I'm a homicidal maniac, and I'm using this tool inappropriately to bash your head. In the first, I'm a productive human being putting the tool to good use. I'd ask listeners to think about this. Don't we think that corporations should be put to the appropriate use? Don't we want them to actually be engaged in commerce that is productive and is helpful? And don't we want to stop any entity, any tool, any instrument if it is repeatedly violating the law, if it is repeatedly causing misery or destruction or harm? That's all. And Move to Amend is happy to tell you that we have thousands of business owners, thousands of corporations that are actually supporting us because they recognize that the question is not about being anti-corporation, it's about being pro-democracy. Because you know what? Democracy does matter.
It does matter.
And
back to the show, right? And also to the listeners out there, you can add your name or your voice to the coalition by going to movetoamend.org, right?
That's right. So if you're excited by this conversation and you want to actually join us, we would love to have you join us. Go to the website movetoamend.org, and if we're really good, maybe we've got a graphic somewhere along right there. If not, you can just remember the words www.movetoamend.org and sign up. And when you sign up, see, we're going to get you in touch with people in your community. I mean, I know I'm talking to New Hampshireites across the state right now, but there are literally dozens of people in the state doing the work that you're doing, Olivia, of helping to build this movement, and we'll get you in touch with other residents to help to build this from the grassroots, a bottom-up movement that's really serious. We're going to take our country back.
Well, and also we have a unique position here in New Hampshire. The presidential candidates are already starting to come through for the 2016 primary, and I was appalled to learn that none of them were talking about how much money is influencing our democracy. And I think it's time that ordinary people get out and start talking to their presidential candidates as they meet them in the coffee shops and at the town halls. And I want to talk to you more about what question do you suggest? Is it, do you believe that corporations are not people and money is not speech? Or what other ideas do you have for regular people to get out and bird dog, get out and ask those tough questions to the candidates, so that this can become part of the dialogue in the next election.
So I'm so glad, Olivia, that you bring this up, because this is super exciting. Move to Amend is spending time in New Hampshire and this warrant and in the next year's warrant, because as this presidential look, for the rest of the country, the presidential campaign hasn't begun. Here in New Hampshire and Iowa, they are the only places where it's begun. And let's just acknowledge the fact that as the first in the state primary, y'all have an enormous ability to influence the national political debate. The rest of the country could only dream of the kind of access that ordinary New Hampshireites have to presidential candidates. So let's put them on the spot, but in an appropriate way. As you say, ask the tough questions. And I think the best question to ask is, do you believe a corporation is a person with constitutional rights? Do you believe that money is speech? And 3, will you support a constitutional amendment to overturn those legal doctrines? Now, those are short and easy to understand, and if you have to educate a presidential candidate about what corporate personhood is, more power to you. And the thing is, we're encouraging people to use a device that many of you probably carry with you, right? These days, we can actually record a candidate's responses. Imagine a campaign where we help to train people in advance on how to ask short, simple questions, how to frame it out so that you get a good video of it, and we'll push it out over our links and so forth. We're also building a candidate questionnaire form so that not just presidential candidates, but I'm excited to tell you this, Olivia, we want congressional candidates, state representative candidates, state Senate candidates, county commissioners, town councils. We are going to build a political movement that says, regardless of your position on other issues, the principle of corporate constitutional rights, the principle that money is not speech, we'd like your position on this, and we're going to start letting our hundreds of thousands, what will soon be millions of people know, because we are going to make this a political issue that candidates must address.
Yeah, and I wonder, one thing I love about studying about Move to Amend is that they've really taken a look at how movements have been led, and able to study how the women's movement were able to succeed in getting a constitutional amendment, how the civil rights movement were able to succeed. What were those lessons that we can learn, and how we can build a movement? Granted, the political realities are a little bit different, but how we build a movement for that next amendment.
Right. So one thing that we know is this, Olivia, that even a cursory read of history tells us that successful efforts have to have movements behind them. No matter how smart your policy issue is, if all you have is a good intellectual argument, and even if you have a champion or two in elected representative, you're not going to go anywhere. And history is replete with examples of that. Instead, movements happen when ordinary people begin to talk to each other. And I cannot underscore enough how powerful it is that we are beginning to engage dialogue and conversation about the proper role of the corporation in our society, how corrupting money is from any side, left or right, middle, I don't care, but huge amounts of money, the tractor trailer truck filled with amplifiers that's basically controlling the dialogue. And let's just be honest here, folks, the only reason you're hearing this conversation is because we're on community access. You know, corporate media doesn't cover this because corporate media, the big transnational corporate media, are part of the problem. We know that. But the movements, the idea of using movements is ordinary people start to talk to each other. We find how much common ground they are. Then we begin to organize each other and with each other, for each other to advocate. And then we realize ultimately we have to go into the political process. The political process usually, by the way, tries to squash new ideas. And I want to be clear again, you know, we think that principled liberals have been lied to and sold out by the ruling elite of the Democratic Party, right? Rank and file Democrats.
Well, I think it happens on the other side too.
And let's go one step further. Principled conservatives have been lied to and sold out by the ruling elite of the Republican Party. And the big Wall Street bankers, you know, big corporations, the big institutional players have the ear, but ordinary folks are left with really nothing. So we need a broad-based movement, but it needs to be broad. It needs to cut across ideology. It needs to cut across race and gender and class. And it's got to go deep. It's got to actually be something that people are saying, I'm ready to throw down on this. That's why we're encouraging you to join us at Move to Amend. Like, make a commitment to actually join with us. And that's the secret. Whenever we actually begin to exercise our power, that's whenever we actually start to see shifts start to happen. And again, whether it's the abolitionist movement, the women's suffrage movement, the civil rights movement, the trade union movement, every movement has required ordinary people to push the existing political structure forward. Movements don't get led by or created in the halls of Congress. Movements get created and led by ordinary people.
And so I encourage the listeners, sort of, if you're outraged by how much money is influencing our political debate, or outraged that, you know, the corporate interest does not serve the public interest, that you start to begin to have those conversations. And so if you're going to go talk to your aunt, where do you begin? Where do you begin on those simple conversations? Because it's such a big issue.
It is, Olivia, and on the other hand, it's a simple issue too. If it's a one-on-one conversation that you want to have with your aunt, for example, I would actually recommend it goes like something like this. Do you believe that we're still living in a country where ordinary people are in control of this country?
No.
And then,
Right.
I like, what I found is by asking what is really an open-ended question invites more conversation. And the person you're talking to will answer and then begin to reveal what her or his position is on other issues. And the most important thing about a conversation like that is to listen. So by asking some provocative questions first, getting some dialogue going, and maybe they think, you know, these big mega corporations and they want to talk about an individual corporation. Well, talk about that for a while and then say, well, you know, what's happening? And talk about the issue as they want to talk about it. Maybe those damn unions who are spending so much money in elections, talk about that for a while and find the common ground, and then say, you know, and ease it into where I think we may have some common ground here, that big special interest money is completely corrupting the political process. Look for common ground first and you'll find it. Look for disagreement first and you'll find it, right? So to us at Move to Amend, we look for the common ground first, Olivia. Now, I want to be clear, we are absolutely committed and will not negotiate an amendment that says corporations, only human beings have constitutional rights and money is not speech. So those are two things that we won't negotiate.
Well, and that's what movements have. They have sort of two principled, valued, moral grounds that are not negotiable like many other things, got negotiated.
Right. And we'll negotiate lots of legislation, but a constitutional amendment, you only get one of those a lifetime. And so we're not going to give up on what we really need to make this country function. The other thing I want to say is that Move to Amend has a wealth of resources available. We do monthly webinars where people can go online and walk through a process to learn either how to talk to folks about corporate personhood, or how to talk to people about the idea that money is speech. But we also will give you tools and trainings on how do you do a petitioning process, how can you engage your local media, for example, here in the process. We have a fantastic documentary called Legalized Democracy that we can make available for free. We make our telephone number and our website available for free. We offer tools to folks to organize in their local communities, to form Move to Amend affiliates if they want to stay on this day in and day out. Because we're not going to quit, Olivia. We're getting larger, stronger, and better organized every day, and we will be part of a movement that amends the Constitution.
Yeah, and so explain to me how that happens, how we actually, as ordinary people, can get to an amendment to the Constitution, and how it's been done before.
Sure. So it's an important question because a constitutional amendment is literally the single most difficult thing you can do in politics, right? There are two ways to propose amendments, one way to ratify it. It always requires a vote of 3/4 of the states to ratify. There are two ways to make constitutional amendment proposals. One, you get 2/3 of Congress to make a proposal to be sent to the states to ratify, or 2/3 of the states call for a constitutional convention, at which point whatever comes out of the convention gets sent to the states for ratification. But in either case, it's still going to take 3/4 of the states to ratify, which is to say, it's going to take a mass movement. I'm proud that we've got 330,000. It's going to take millions of us actively engaged and involved, making it a political issue. So ultimately, frankly, we're going to have champions both at the local, city, municipal level, and at the state representative level, and at the congressional level that are actually behind this. So that's the mechanics of it. But I don't want folks to get daunted by the mechanics of it, because I want to remind you that the 13th Amendment abolished slavery. The 14th Amendment guaranteed equal protection. The 15th Amendment guaranteed the right to vote for African Americans. The 21st Amendment, like the 19th Amendment guaranteeing the rights to vote for women. And let me be clear, women were not given the right to vote.
Right.
Women demanded and
organized
and earned the right to vote. And I'm going to go further, Olivia. Women had the right to vote to begin with, but the law illegitimately, inappropriately, state laws forbid women's votes from being counted. Right?
Yeah.
So let's be clear about
and you sort of hear stories of this African-American man who walked down to the polls, and he paid his poll tax, and he was denied the right to vote. But he kept doing it every election, right? Because he said, I have the right to vote, even though those officials that say I can't vote, and just he kept walking down. And I think as we think about this, I think none of us believe that the flood of the corporate money equals speech. We all believe we have First Amendment rights of speech, but money equaling speech means those that have money have the speech.
And those that have more money have more speech. And those who have so much money that they can drown out our voices mean our speech becomes irrelevant. And it's so awesome when you tell that story, because I've heard that same story too. And imagine the strength of conviction, the knowledge that he was right, and that he was going to exercise his right even if the racists behind the counter and the racist state laws were going to not count his vote. He knew that he was right. Let's just take a moment to acknowledge, Olivia, that if women before you had not had the courage of those convictions, you wouldn't be here at something like this.
Right. No, or the women who fought for pay equity 50 years ago, we're an evolving society, and that we need to continue to evolve and change our rights as we see fit. And so corporations have been driving their rights into our election, and we see that we got drowned out. So it's time we start organizing to fight back.
Absolutely, and that's what's happening across the country, Olivia, because, again, we're super excited. New Hampshire has really amped up in a way that I'm not being sycophantic, right, with New Hampshireites. I mean, we were at 100 before y'all rolled onto the scene, and now I can say we're at 140. So you can understand my justifiable enthusiasm for being in New Hampshire. But it's not just in New Hampshire, right? And here's the thing, Olivia. We won in West Allis, Wisconsin, where Republicans outnumber Democrats by a 2-to-1 margin.
We won in Salem, New Hampshire, which is the same situation, and Pelham, and so many of these other communities. It's people from the right and the left are outraged by the fact that we need a democracy movement. And I've had the honor to talk to some of the presidential candidates, and so I spoke with John Huntsman back in November, and he said we need a democracy movement because he was one of those sort of pushed aside because he was not that wealthy elite, and he said we need a democracy movement that drives these constitutional rights into the.
Think about this. John Huntsman, in the very last election, both John Huntsman and Buddy Roemer, both people who were in the Republican primaries, right? Who were advocating this position, were never allowed on
John
the
Huntsman
debates.
was. Buddy Roemer
was never in a single debate.
But John Huntsman is like the CEO on the Ford Foundation.
Right.
I mean, the Ford. He's a big corporate CEO who also believes that we need to make sure that ordinary people have these rights and that they're not drawn out.
Well, thanks for the correction on John Huntsman. I know because I had the privilege of being on a stage with Buddy Roemer, and so I know he wasn't even allowed to debate. So John Huntsman was.
And Buddy Roemer wouldn't take more than $100.
Right.
He sort of said, principally, I'm a conservative and I don't want to take more than $100.
But
he wasn't taken seriously.
Right. Well, and the other thing that happened.
But you ran for president.
I did, as a matter of fact. I was on the Green Party ticket. But the reality is, Olivia, that the point that I'm trying to make is whether one is a principled conservative, a principled liberal, a moderate, there is common ground around the corporate takeover of our government and the corrupting influence of money in elections. And again, whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, a Green, a Libertarian, an Independent, we at Move to Amend are absolutely transpartisan. We're not nonpartisan because we actually are going to engage in partisan debate and discourse, but we want everybody to feel welcome at Move to Amend. That you can be a Republican, you can be a Democrat, you can be a Green, you can be an Independent, you can be a Libertarian and still have common ground with us. And so we're a transpartisan movement that's transcending the typical issues. And what's interesting is once we start to talk that way, we start to find out we've got common ground on a lot of stuff. We need an independent political force in this country that is going outside of the traditional political party system to say we're going to actually advocate for what we want. And when we have to disagree, then we won't work on that issue together.
Right.
But when we can agree, we'll work on that issue together. And what we find is 80% of the American people are already in agreement with this. If you look at the polling data, 80% of the American people support the idea of getting money out of elections and that corporations don't have constitutional rights. 80%.
Well, and in a recent poll in New Hampshire, 96% of Granite Staters believed that we need to do something to curb the corrupting influence of money in politics, right?
Wow.
96% of Granite Staters agree. I don't think there's many things you can say that 96% of Granite Staters. But the second question in that poll that I was really struck by is that 91% of people felt like the problem was so big they couldn't do anything about it. So that means there's only like 5% people like you and me that feel like we need to do something to engage. And that's really where I feel like there's got to be some organizing, because I know it's tough. I have a job, I have kids, you run and you do your work, you take care of your kids, but then you have to make some time and some space to really devote to doing some important work to really take back our country, to make it better for our kids.
Especially if you have kids or grandkids, I would say, right? I mean, let's just be honest. If we don't get control over this process, we are going to lose what we have taken for granted, which is a democratic republic. And I've talked to elders, I've talked to grandparents, I've talked to people of generations before me, and they are appalled at what they're seeing happen. And here's the point. It's going to get worse unless we make it better. And so I appreciate, Olivia, that I know that you've got a job, you know, and to be clear,
And I get paid to do some organizing.
well, and you've got kids, which is a job in and of itself, right? So you've got all of these responsibilities, and the fact that you're finding time to do this work. I want to encourage viewers to give what time you have, right? We're not asking you for money. We're asking for your civic engagement. And just going and pulling a lever every 2 to 4 years, yes, voting is important, absolutely. Never let it be said that David Cobb does not encourage voting. We have to be willing to vote. But I want to be honest with you. If all you ever do is go pull a lever every 2 to 4 years and accept some significant systemic change to happen, you're wasting your time. But if you have the opportunity to vote for a candidate who's calling for systemic change and you don't pull that lever, you're wasting an opportunity, right? So absolutely vote. And 5 hours a week. Just 5 hours a week of figuring out a way to work on Move to Amend would actually make all the difference in the world. You know, I want to tell you something, Olivia. 12 of us started Move to Amend in a living room in 2010. Today, we're at 331,000. We have 500 resolutions at the city and county level. 16 states have passed resolutions. Now I'm happy to tell you 140 communities have voted in favor of the Move to Amend effort. By every tangible, objective measure, we're growing. But we're just at the beginning, right? We're just at the beginning of what we need to do. We need to have the courage of our convictions, but we've also got to have the patience to win. Right. You know, the abolitionist movement, the women's suffrage movement, the civil rights movement, these movements take time, but we have to be intentional and deliberate. We've got to take the time to celebrate our victories, and Granite State can celebrate a huge victory of warrants. And we've got to continue to do the work. We've got to laugh together, play together. We've got to change the culture.
Well, and really rebuild our community, because our community has been eroded. And you sort of see the erosion of our community. And I wanted to ask you, and it sort of takes us in a little bit of a direction, about the Powell memo. Because I think it's something really important, and no one really is talking about it.
Well, yes, I'm happy to talk. This is Powell, as in Lewis Powell, the former Supreme Court Justice. But before he was a Supreme Court Justice, Lewis Powell worked for the Chamber of Commerce. Lewis Powell wrote a memo in the 1970s, and in that memo, he outlined a strategy for how corporate America could reassert its dominance over all of society. And the way that memo outlined was, well, we need to go into universities and colleges across this country and ensure that only people who hold the corporate ideology are able to actually get tenure-track jobs. And we need a campaign to replace the existing Board of Regents, who, by the way, are the ones who make university policy. At that time, the Board of Regents were all actually members of academia, and they were they were teachers who studied the pedagogy and studied the theory of teaching and how teaching was done. He said we need to replace the Board of Regents with corporate CEOs. But it didn't stop at education. He said we've got to go into the law schools. And we've got to change the curriculum. We've got to change the process.
Before that memo, there was very few corporate lobbyists in Washington, D.C.
That's right, because it didn't stop at the law school. It didn't stop at the university. He also said the media. We've got to actually fight back against these so-called independent journalists. Think about it. The outrage that they had over people like Walter Cronkite, was not following the corporate line.
But to me, like the whole notion that we didn't have corporate lobbyists before this memo was written in the 70s, and now we have how many of them on K Street that are making our public policy?
Correct, because the plan was they knew they had to change the culture and that they had to build a movement, but they knew they couldn't build a mass movement in support of we need more corporate power. So their plan was to go to the educational institutions, to go to the media institutions, and to create things like the Cato Institute and the Heritage Foundation and think tanks, right? There had been no think tanks before that time. They were creating a process to put forward policy papers and position papers that would shift public discourse. And the idea of the lobbyist, the corporate lobbyist, was created in order to ensure that the policies that they were proposing were actually now going to be accepted and put into office. The Powell Memo is an example of a clear, calculated analysis to actually take over a government, a politics, but to do it through a culture shift and using not the ballot box. And now here's the last thing. Lewis Powell, lawyer for the Chamber of Commerce, gets appointed by Richard Nixon onto the Supreme Court, and as Supreme Court Justice authored the Supreme Court decision called Buckley versus Vallejo. The first time
which is the money is speech.
That he created the money is speech. And following that, First National Bank versus Bellotti that says corporations can spend money on initiatives. In the 1970s, you actually started to see for the first time corporations coming in to the political process at the and spending money. Do you know that before Buckley versus Vallejo that it was a felony to spend money, corporate dollars, to even influence an election?
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. It used to be a felony to even spend corporate treasury dollars to influence an election in most states.
But just to say that was 40 years ago, and they created a tremendous amount of culture shift in our society that we really have to sort of begin to say, okay, well, it's time that we say no.
That's right. Ya basta. No. And this is the reason that I continue to have such optimism and enthusiasm, Olivia, is because I recognize because this problem is so big, I can't do anything about it unless I work with others, because we can do something about it, and only we can do something about it. So I give myself permission to say I'm going to do my best. I'm going to do my best organizing. I'm going to do my best advocacy work. I'm going to do my best, and I release the result. I'm not taking the responsibility as an individual. I'm only taking my responsibility to do the best that I can to try to leave this world better for the people who come after me.
Well, there's two types of power in this country. There's organized money and there's organized people. And so we as the collective people need to say we're going to stand up to this organized money.
That's right. And you know, again, we the people actually have way more power than we dare to believe. We're just not collectively exercising it. And so for folks who are interested in this, again, if you go to the website movetoamend.org, you can sign up. But not just so you're signed up on a petition and get some emails every now and then. We want to engage you. We want you to be part of this growing movement. We want you to work with people in your community to actually do the work over time that will shift the culture, that will shift the power, that will actually make the United States of America a functioning democratic republic. It's just that easy, and it's just that hard.
Mm-hmm. And David's here in New Hampshire. He's speaking tonight in Nashua, tomorrow in Peterborough, Sunday in Manchester and Concord, and you're doing the rounds from Dartmouth to Durham. So this week, so we're grateful that you're here in state for 6 days and doing a lot of things. So I encourage people to look up your schedule and come to one of these talks and meet your friends and neighbors and really begin to start having these conversations. But even if you aren't able to make it to one of the talks, I'm sure you can find one of your talks online, right?
You can. Movetoamend.org and look it up. There are plenty of videos. But here's the other thing. I know that especially this time of year, New Hampshireites are used to people making the rounds. So the fact that I'm in 6 or 7 places in a week, you know, but I'm going to make this pledge. See, here's the difference. I'm going to come back. I'm going to come back this year and next year And I'm going to keep coming back and making the rounds until we amend the Constitution, because I'm not asking for anybody's vote. I'm asking you to join a movement that will actually empower us so that our votes matter. And that's something that's different. Again, I know that I've said it before, I want to say it again. New Hampshire is so important to this movement because you have the ability to frame political discourse. We've got great ideas for you. I don't want to go into too many of them now, but I'm going to float a couple of them out there. Imagine wearing a costume that we give you the instructions to build so that you're a corporate person. And you, not just as an individual, but a corporate person contacts a presidential candidate to say, hey, I hear that you think I'm a person. I want to talk to you. Imagine being dressed up.
Or in the 4th of July parade where the candidates are coming, right? You can be a corporate person in your parade.
So we've got corporate person costumes, we've got dollar bill costumes, we've got fun stuff that we can share with you. And
you can also stamp your money so your dollar bills can speak. It says a corporation is not a person and money is not speech with movetoamend.org. So you can also stamp your money.
We also have one that's my favorite. I want to so we've got that stamp, a corporation is not a person. We have another one that says the system isn't broken, it's fixed. The one I like the most says this note not to be used to bribe elected officials. So we'll give you stamps to stamp.
I've stamped some money and said, okay, this is the not to be used to bribe a politician.
Right, it's so fun, right? So all I'm getting at is this: that yes, I'm traveling New Hampshire, but I and Move to Amend are going to be back, and we want to work with y'all.
Great. And so for those people who are interested in becoming an affiliate, how do you do that?
It's actually super easy. We just need 3 or 4 of you to get together to make the commitment. We'll give you tools and resources on that. We'll also make you available. Let's say you're in Londonderry, and there's not a Move to Amend formal affiliate here yet. And so we say, okay, well, I know that we've got several hundred names on a list right now in Londonderry. We say, well, first thing to do is to call a meeting to make a commitment that we want to be part of a movement to abolish corporate constitutional rights. We'll give you think of it like organizing in a box. We'll say, here is how to find a venue for a meeting. Here is a basic email to send out. Here's a flyer to put up at coffee shops and libraries. And
and if you want to change the flyer, it's edit.
Absolutely. But we give you tools, right? And you can use the ones that make sense and leave the rest, right? But we give you tools to host that first meeting. We have a suggested simple outline for a first agenda. We give you tons of information for reading so that you're prepared to talk about it at the level you and I have.
And it's also sometimes hard to facilitate a meeting, so there's, ways, facilitator guides.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Things like
and again, we see our job, Olivia, as helping to give people tools and to train them how to use them. Because too much in our country today, we have lost the civic energy and we've lost the civic muscle. We've let it atrophy. The number of people who actually know how to conduct and facilitate an old-fashioned town meeting where you have lots of voices, we've lost that. So we're helping to train people to do that again. And what's great about Move to Amend, all our tools, all our strategies, all our tactics can be used on any other issue that you care about as well. So the affiliate process is one that we actually see empowering people to be able to move forward to build the democracy movement that we so desperately need.
So I challenge the listeners, if you're out there and you want to be more engaged and you think democracy does matter, I challenge you to start. Have a potluck. Invite your friends and host your first meeting and see what you say. See what you get. Listen, right? Is
right.
What you're encouraging people to do?
That's right. We got to listen. We got to talk to each other. But at the end of the day, Olivia, what we have to do is build a movement. And so if in this conversation it's been exciting to you, again, the website is movetoamend.org. The telephone number, if you want to call us, we're happy to call you and get you in touch with local people, is 707-269-0984. We'll give all the help that we can, but at the end of the day, what I know is what you know, Olivia, that unless and until we work together to organize ourselves as a people, we'll never be able to confront the organized money that has taken over our government.
Great. And I've been posting on the New Hampshire page, so movetoamend.New Hampshire. I've been posting a lot of things and post some events, like on April 12th, there's a big event hosted by Citizens United. And so Rick Santorum and all these different presidential candidates, Donald Trump, I think, is coming. So they're coming right up the road. Before the show was on, we were talking about, like, what are we going to do? There's some of us that are going to stand outside and with some signs, and there's some of us who were lucky enough to get tickets and go inside and ask and confront those politicians. So there's tons of activities here, and sometimes they can happen right at your local coffee shop.
And you know what I would love to ask somebody like Rick Santorum, who is a person of faith, and I think he takes that very seriously.
I think you're right.
And I would like to ask him this question. Senator, do you agree with me that only God can endow a creation with inherent and inalienable rights? Do you agree with me that the idea that government or the courts can claim to create something and then give it life is illegitimate? And I mean that very sincerely, because I think that the idea of corporate constitutional rights at its core is actually a profound insult to a deeply held spiritual view about the proper relationship between the divine and human beings. And I'd like to engage Rick Santorum in that question at that level and take him at his word, take him from his perspective, not try to convince him of anything, but say, according to your own deeply held religious conviction, isn't this wrong?
Yeah, and there's many. I was at a local faith community. There's many faith communities that sort of have signed on to the Move to Amend.
In fact, there is an interfaith caucus now where we are bringing together Christians, both Protestants and Catholics. We're bringing together Muslims and Hindus alike, who are saying our religious, spiritual convictions are driving us to say that corporations don't have constitutional rights. So there is.
And I was able to speak to the Justice Sunday Mass to the entire congregation just a month ago, and they did a little, members of the congregation did a little skit where one of them became, was the, I'd like to come speak to the corporation, and it was a really cute, 2 or 3 minute sort of skit. So if you're interested in community theater, there's a ways to incorporate some of this activism.
And isn't that beautiful? So there are skits and there's the stamping, so there's a lot of fun that you can do. And we can actually be very sort of somber and sober and engage in conversations in the faith community. And to think about doing a fun skit in a place of worship at the same time, I mean, how beautiful is that,
Yeah,
right?
and they sung the lyrics to the Move to Amend song.
How fun.
So that was part of the, and it sort of, it's got, what is the words, Move to Amend?
Yes.
Do you know the song?
I do. There are actually several songs, so it depends on which one they did.
The Blowing in the Wind?
Oh, yes. No, that's very funny. So a group of people have taken the classic folk song and put it to Move to Amend lyrics. That one's a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun to sing in the church. So any closing thoughts?
Olivia, I just want to thank you, and I want to thank the program Democracy Matters and the nonprofit, nonpartisan that gave me this opportunity. And I want to take this moment to thank the local community access system in place, because this conversation has only taken place because there is actually a place where we, the people, can actually talk to ourselves without the corporate filter and without the need to sell 30-second advertising, that has to actually come from big moneyed interests. So I'm really grateful to public access because it gives the public access to the media to talk to each other. And at the end of the day, that's what this conversation has been. A conversation with us viewed by others, but I'm encouraging you to replicate this conversation, have hundreds of thousands of them across New Hampshire.
Great. And so just a few moments. Karen, our host, gave me some words to say to close. She encourages you to take action. Medicaid expansion passed our Senate last week and is going to the House. And so please call your House member and ask them to vote in favor of Senate Bill 413 so that 50,000 Granite Staters can have access to health care. Also, the minimum wage bill, an increase in the minimum wage just passed the House and is going over to the Senate. And so please call your senator and ask them to support House Bill 1403 to increase the minimum wage. And if you're not interested in calling your legislative office, please write a letter to the paper expressing your opinion, whether it's on move to amend or on any of those issues that you can feel compassionate about. So thank you so much for your time.